A bombshell name drop during testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. Why were singers Usher and Ne-Yo brought up in the courtroom? We're diving into the connection these A-listers and music legends have to the now disgraced music mogul, and what the night in question that a witness claims they were in attendance for means to how this trial could play out.
The storm surrounding Diddy has reached a point where silence is no longer possible. His empire, once untouchable, is now shaking under the weight of revelations that refuse to go away. And what makes this unraveling even more devastating is the fact that the revelations aren't coming from outsiders.
Sean Combs is connected to a lot of big names in Hollywood and the music industry. That's not breaking news, but it was a bit of a surprise this week when Usher and Ne-Yo's names came up during testimony. The witness that brought up Ne-Yo and Usher was Dawn Richard. She was once a member of the singing group Danity Kane. That group was signed to Diddy's label, Bad Boy Records, and she also sang for another bad boy group called Diddy Dirty Money. Sean Combs was actually part of that group. It was a trio. They had a few songs that came out between 2009 and 2011. Prosecutors called Richard to testify. Now, before I get into the moment where Usher and Ne-Yo were brought up, I want to take you through her testimony and what led to the point that she brought their names into this. Now, Richard told prosecutors in 2009, she witnessed Sean Combs allegedly attack his then girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, the singer known as Cassie, who has already testified in this trial that she was abused by Combs physically and sexually during their 10-year relationship that ended in 2018. Now, here's a line in the transcript where Richard said, quote, "I observed Cassie being attacked," and then, when asked, "Who attacked Cassie?" she answered, quote, "She was attacked by Sean Combs." In the incident in 2009 that Richard talked about, she said she was recording music at Combs' LA home. Cassie was making eggs, and then Combs comes downstairs, quote, angry, and was saying where the expletive was his eggs. Excuse my language. And he was telling Cassie that she never gets anything right, where the expletive is his food. And he proceeded to come over to her, took the skillet with the eggs in it, and then tried to hit her over the head with it, and she fell to the ground. Richard told prosecutors that she witnessed Diddy allegedly attack Cassie multiple times, physically beating her. And while she was a member of Diddy Dirty Money between 2009 and 2011, she said it was frequent that she would see these things. She said that Combs would, quote, punch her, choke her, drag her, slap her in the mouth. I saw him kick her, punch her in the stomach. Now, when it comes to Usher and Ne-Yo, their names are brought up related to an incident in 2010 that happened at a restaurant in California. Dawn Richard was asked about this incident both by the prosecution and defense, but it's interesting how her answers and the details she gives are different depending on the questions that are asked. Richard was asked about that incident. It was in West Hollywood, California. There was a restaurant, a dinner with a lot of powerful people in 2010. And at that dinner, Richard says Diddy allegedly punched Cassie in the stomach. She said, quote, "We were having a private conversation, and when we're all sitting, eating at the tables together, when I say we, I mean some bad boys, some of our other label, and some celebrities were in the room, and they were secretly arguing, and he punched her in the stomach." Sean Combs punched her in the stomach. The prosecution then asks, quote, "Who, if any of Mr. Combs' employees were present?" And Richard says Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, D-Rock, Bonds, myself, and Kalina Harper. Now, the prosecution then asks Richard about Harv Pierre. He was a bad boy executive, and he answered to Sean Diddy Combs. The prosecution also asked how, quote, employees reacted to Combs allegedly punching Cassie in the stomach, to which Richard didn't really follow that line in their questioning. They did ask about bad boy employees who were present at the restaurant, to which Richard named people like Combs, the bodyguard D-Rock, Pierre the executive. But then the defense had their chance at cross-examination, and through their questioning is when we saw those big names drop. The defense asked Richard, "Please tell me who was all at this restaurant." Richard answers, Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, and myself, Kalina, our bodyguards, which was Bonds, and D-Rock, Cassie. The question continues with the defense asking, "You remember who was all there, right?" And Richard says, "Mm-hmm." The defense asks, "Do you recall alleging several
They're coming from people who knew him intimately, people who lived inside his orbit, people who saw the things the public was never meant to see." Usher has broken his silence, and the things he has revealed about his time with Diddy are disturbing enough on their own. But when those revelations begin to overlap with the history of Justin Bieber, the picture that forms is nothing short of shocking. To understand the weight of these revelations, you have to go back to the very beginning of Usher's career. He was barely more than a kid when he was introduced to Diddy, bright-eyed, talented, eager to break into the industry. Usher thought he was walking into mentorship, into opportunity, into the kind of guidance that would shape him into a star. And in many ways, that part was true. Diddy had the connections, the influence, the power to open doors nobody else could. But with that power came a darkness, a world that no teenager should have been exposed to, a world where boundaries blurred and the rules of normal life no longer applied. Usher has now admitted that those early days weren't what he thought they would be. He describes being thrown into parties that went far beyond anything he could comprehend at his age. Nights where the music was loud, the lights were low, and the atmosphere was anything but innocent. He remembers being
celebrities were actually there, and Richard says yes, and the defense then says, quote, "So when the government asked you who was all there, and I asked you who was all there right now, you didn't mention any of the celebrities, right?" Right, Richard says. The defense then asks Richard to name the celebrities. And then she says, quote, "Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. There were a few others too. I don't recall those people, but those are the ones I remember talking to." The defense then pressed Richard a bit, asking why she didn't say those names before when she was asked about who was there by the defense. And Richard says she was just repeating what she told the government in their direct examination. Usher and Diddy go back decades. Usher lived with Combs for a year, actually, when he was just a rising star in the music industry. He was 13, 14 years old at the time. Usher actually spoke about living with Combs in an interview 8 years ago on the Howard Stern show. Here's part of what he said.
You're going to go to Puff Daddy's. He's going
in the 90s. Do you understand what that's like?
Puffy's place was like just filled with chicks and orgying like nonstop, right?
No, not really. I mean, but hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Now, as far as Grammy winner Neo, he is someone who has been known to be a friend of Diddy and to be in the same social circles over the years. He faced backlash for a comment he made in the wake of Diddy's arrest during a performance in New Zealand last year, where he reportedly said, quote, on stage, "I was sexually assaulted and I liked it. I had a great time and I'd do it again." He later apologized for that and said, quote, "In an attempt to be playful with my fans, I made an insensitive and irresponsible joke while on tour, and I'd like to truly apologize from the bottom of my heart." This is according to the UK media outlet, The Metro. Now, the other name that Richard mentioned was Jimmy Levine. He is a music legend. He is known as the co-founder of Interscope Records, so an incredibly powerful person in the music industry. It's important to note that in her testimony, Richard did not specifically say that any of the three actually witnessed that alleged moment where Combs punched Ventura in the stomach, but she did say that they were allegedly there that night. Now, none of the three have released statements since their names were brought up in court. Combs is on trial. He's expected to be on trial for roughly 7 more weeks. He's charged with racketeering, sex trafficking by force, and transportation to engage in prosecution. He has pleaded not guilty. Joining us now once again to talk about this case is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson-Ferrer. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Usher's name, he comes up yesterday, and that was kind of a moment where people clearly recognize who Don Richard was talking about. What should we take away from that anecdote and the fact that Usher's name was brought up?
The fact that Usher's name was brought up, I think one of two things about it. On one hand, it's irrelevant. It doesn't go to prove or disprove whether Mr. Combs is guilty of the charges as alleged in the indictment. On the other hand, I do think that it provides background information that there were other individuals that could have possibly observed these alleged assaults or attacks on Ms. Ventura. Not only that, but if the government intends on establishing a timeline or a pattern of events with respect to Mr. Combs, his enterprise, and their dealings with individuals from the public or in the industry, it's good to note that the allegation, or at least the testimony came in, that Usher was involved with Mr. Combs early on in his career.
Surrounded by excess, by behaviors that were reckless and dangerous, by a lifestyle that celebrated indulgence without limit. For a teenager, it was confusing, overwhelming, and, in hindsight, deeply damaging. What he once thought was mentorship now feels more like exploitation, exposure to things no young artist should have endured. And this is where the story takes an even darker turn, because Usher wasn't the only young star to fall under Diddy's influence. Years later, Justin Bieber, at the very height of his fame, found himself in that same orbit. The world remembers the strange videos, The unsettling interviews. The moments where Diddy openly spoke about wanting to spend time with Bieber in ways that made fans uncomfortable. At the time, people brushed it off. Diddy was eccentric, they said. He was joking, they said. But now, with Usher's revelations out in the open, those old clips have taken on a completely different meaning. Suddenly, what once seemed
until now, but I think it's important that he did, and he also, like many celebrities in Hollywood, want to stay as far away from the Diddy trial as possible.
Because you think that there was talk of him testifying and he didn't, he wanted to shut that down.
I think so. I think people want to know, because look, the trial is lasting 2 months, right? 8 weeks, maybe even 10 weeks. And I know Judge Subramanian is trying to move it along as quickly as he can, but now that Cassie Ventura is wrapping up her testimony, we know that we're going to hear from a couple other victims, but the government needs to fill that time. And what they want to do is put on victims that really aren't in a romantic relationship and never have been with Combs, right? Cassie got impeached with some of that, the emails, the text messages, the words that she put, those words of affirmation. So to the extent that there are other victims, that's how the government's going to be able to overwhelm the defense here. And if it's a celebrity victim, even better.
See, here's the thing. I think about it. And I'm sure he didn't want to, I guess the idea is, not distract from the conversation that's being had, but to make a statement towards the end of the week, after opening statements, or towards the conclusion of Cassandra Ventura's testimony, when he makes a statement confirming that there were people harmed by Combs, does that signify to you that he believes the prosecution's case, or does he think it's beyond the criminal case and based on the accusations we've seen in the civil arena?
I think it's probably the former. And like you said, the key part of that statement was denying that he was a victim, but really talking about the other victims. And it wasn't alleged victims. He said other victims, well, through his spokesperson. So I think that is very, very important. This isn't a Michael Jackson type case where, celebrities are rushing to Combs' defense. Very few people are. And the fact that you have someone come out that really isn't 50 Cent or someone who, is trying to make light of it or a documentary about it and really point the finger at Diddy, that's a big deal, Jesse.
Mm-hmm. And he mentioned harmed by him, right? It was very specific language. They were genuinely harmed by him, and the shifting focus away from this reality distracts from the justice these victims rightfully deserve. There's no way to parse that language.
There isn't, and the defense is obviously trying to separate physical harm from sex trafficking and sexual assault, but the average person who's watching isn't going to be making that distinction. That may matter in the case, but it's not going to matter in the court of public opinion.
And Bieber's statement, it comes as this TikTok started floating around on Friday. There was a doctored image of Bieber where he allegedly announces that he's going to testify against Combs, but the video was quickly debunked as fake. And Nima, you think at the end of the day, are we going to see some celebrity or celebrity friends testify at this trial?
I think we have to, because there's got to be independent witnesses that, saw some of this, right? I'm not saying maybe the actual freak-offs themselves, maybe there are other participants, but, Combs was very public, and Cassie Ventura, to the extent that she
now feels sinister. Suddenly, the idea of Bieber being mentored by Diddy doesn't look like guidance. It looks like history repeating itself. Because when you place Usher's stories next to Bieber's experiences, the parallels are impossible to ignore. Young artists, drawn in by promises of mentorship, exposed to environments they never should have been a part of, and left to deal with the long-term consequences of that exposure. For Justin Bieber, the consequences have been painfully public. His battles with addiction, his mental health struggles, his breakdowns in the spotlight, fans have watched him unravel time and time again. And now, people are asking whether those struggles can be traced back to his time with Diddy. Was he, like Usher, thrown into situations that scarred him? Was he exposed to a lifestyle that damaged him before he was old enough to understand what was happening? These questions are being asked loudly now, and the silence surrounding them is deafening. The internet has erupted in the wake of Usher's words. Old interviews, old photos, old footage are being dissected frame by frame.
He was abused. Look, it's like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, right? You got Kate Moss was brought into that case. People that are rich and famous celebrities, they have rich and famous celebrity friends, right? That's why Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, we're talking about Taylor Swift. This is a small circle here in Hollywood. So the independent witnesses are very likely going to be other celebrities. So I think we're just starting to scratch the surface when it comes to that.
So the question becomes, why do fans believe that Justin Bieber could have been one of Sean Combs' targets, right? You mentioned it before. Well, as the legal saga against Combs ramped up last year, there was video clips that started to resurface of Combs and Bieber spending some time together. And people noticed that the videos often kind of straddled the line between awkward and inappropriate. And Bieber sometimes seemed really uncomfortable. For example, when Bieber was 15 years old, he uploaded a video to his YouTube channel called 48 Hours with Diddy. And this is where he said he was going to be hanging out with the rapper for a couple of days.
So check this out, yo. Justin, you ever seen the movie 48 Hours? Right now, he's having 48 hours with Diddy, him and his boy. They're having the times of their lives, like where we hanging out and what we doing. We can't really disclose, but it's definitely a 15-year-old's dream.
Now, some fans called out Combs for allegedly grooming behavior they say was exhibited in this video, spending time at his home with a young kid who's suddenly been thrown into the world of fame and money, taking him under his wing, offering up opportunities, maybe gifts that he could only dream of.
Yeah, so as soon as you turn 16, you know what I'm saying, I'm gonna let you rock this every time you come to LA. Yeah, this gonna be yours. So, every time you come to LA, it's a little dusty, but you know, come get the front shot of this.
Man.
Head that out. Minute.
Woo. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna be driving this next year.
Now, look, of course, this could all be for the camera, it could be performative. Bieber could have left right after this. We don't really know, but the video made the rounds. Speculation around Combs grew. And then another clip surfaced, and this one posted to Combs' YouTube page showing another interaction, this time apparently in a studio.
What's up, man? You good?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, young brother, everything's good?
Everything's
Selling
great.
out arenas and everything? Starting to act different, huh? You ain't been calling me and hanging out the way we used to hang out.
Well, I mean, you try to get in contact with me, through all my, partners and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But you never really got my number, so.
Right, okay.
My number?
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you my number.
Yeah.
Awkward, I don't know, it could have been a joke for the cameras. Nima, what do you take away from these videos?
Yeah, it's awkward and it's weird. So, look, if it's just by itself, maybe you look past it. But there's been a lot of allegations involving minors, not in the criminal case that hasn't been charged. That would be a game changer, but in the civil lawsuits. So I'm not saying that those are true, but sometimes when there's smoke, there's fire. And you have a lot of these civil claimants alleging that Combs is also sexually abusing men and boys and children. So again, not charged in the criminal case, but given those allegations out there, I think it's something that people are going to pick up on, and rumors and speculation are going to fly.
So according to sources,
people are connecting dots that had been ignored for years. A clip of Bieber looking uncomfortable in Diddy's presence. A moment where Diddy speaks about owing time with Bieber. A history that, when pieced together, paints a very disturbing picture. And with Usher's confirmation of what he endured, it becomes harder and harder to dismiss those connections as coincidence. Diddy, on the other hand, is reportedly furious. Sources close to him say he's unraveling, lashing out at those around him, scrambling to regain control. His legal battles were already threatening to destroy his legacy, but this is something different. This isn't just about lawsuits and courtrooms. This is about morality, about public perception, about the irreversible damage of being linked to the exploitation of innocence. Once that narrative takes hold, there is no recovery. You can fight charges in court, but you can't fight the disgust of the public once they believe you've crossed that line. And what makes this moment so dangerous for Diddy is that Usher isn't an enemy, he isn't a rival, he isn't a bitter outsider trying to score points. He's someone who came up under Diddy, someone who owes part of his career to that mentorship. The credibility of his voice is what makes this revelation devastating. If someone like Usher is willing to speak up, what does that say about the stories still hidden? What does that say about the secrets still buried? What does that say about the possibility that
one or whether it was many? Testimony is evidence, and whether that was testimony from one person or testimony from multiple people, the jury can still consider that as evidence in determining whether Mr. Combs is guilty or not guilty. If these individuals observe that, then the hope would be that someone would have intervened earlier on. But again, it doesn't negate the fact that, the charges here are racketeering, sex trafficking, and things of that nature. One of the things the government is alleging is the use of force. So I think that's why we continue to hear this domestically violent line of questioning. And I think the government is hoping that the jurors will view this as satisfactory to the element requiring requiring force, physical force of violence.
Yeah, and to your point, I'll just looking at this transcript, you're right. Yeah, it's Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. So it's saying that they were there, not necessarily that they witnessed the abuse that Dawn Richard said happened at this dinner. What did you make of her testimony now that she's off the stand?
It was pretty interesting testimony. I don't know that she was a necessary witness, although the government deemed her to be necessary. Ms. Ventura got on the stand and testified about the abuse, testified about what happened to her. Ms. Richard seemingly came up behind her and corroborated for the government those allegations. And I don't think there was even a question about that. The hotel footage came into evidence. Ms. Ventura testified, so now Ms. Richard is here testifying to more allegations of domestic violence. And the government has to be really careful here, because the way that it is being painted at this point is that this is a domestically violent case, which is true. But the government needs to prove a RICO. They need to prove sex trafficking. They don't need to prove domestic violence, and it can certainly confuse the issues with the jury and ultimately land them in a verdict of not guilty.
I know some of the evidence that the government will point to, some of frequent flyer accounts, credit cards, bank accounts. We haven't really heard a lot about that as of yet. How do you see the government, now that they've really established, whether it's Cassie's testimony, some things that Dawn Richard has said about the domestic abuse, the violence that was in this relationship, where do they go from here if they are going to paint this picture of a RICO, which is essentially what they need to do in this trial if they want to get a conviction?
Yeah, so what the government's going to continue to do is put on their witnesses. I think that they got a witness on the stand that worked for Mr. Combs at a certain point in time. That individual also testified to some alleged violent behavior on behalf of Mr. Combs. I think if this individual is still testifying, or as other individuals continue to testify, we will start to hear about transportation with regard to these alleged sex workers. So one of the things that the government has to prove and show is that there was a transportation via interstate commerce, which is a very wide net and catch-all for the government in order to seek a conviction, is that these individuals were transported or traveled via interstate commerce from one state to another. So we may hear testimony about frequent flyer accounts, or whoever the individual was that set up these or purchased these plane tickets, or if they flew private. Whoever set up the transportation and travel may ultimately testify. We might hear from them to further establish that
Bieber himself may one day come forward. This is more than just a scandal. This is the collapse of a myth. For decades, Diddy presented himself as a mogul, a mentor, a man who built empires and shaped stars. But now, that image is crumbling. What's emerging instead is a picture of a man who used his influence to surround himself with youth, with innocence, with people who trusted him, only to be pulled into a world they were never ready for. According to Usher, those early years weren't just about music and mentorship. He describes an environment that was far from normal, one that exposed him to adult behaviors and situations no teenager should have been a part of, parties that went too far, nights that blurred boundaries, and moments that he admits shaped him in ways he didn't fully understand until years later. And the most shocking part is that these stories don't just stop with him, because Usher isn't the only young star who was drawn into Diddy's orbit. Justin Bieber, at the height of his rise, also found himself spending time with Diddy. Old videos have resurfaced of Diddy making bizarre comments about Bieber, talking about spending time with him in ways that, even back then, made people uncomfortable. At the time, fans brushed it
was just about Cassie using Bonna's name in her lawsuit, which she didn't want to happen. Bonna didn't want her name to be used in Cassie's now settled lawsuit. And so Bonna was asked, were you and Cassie trying to make up this story or tell Cassie what had happened to you? And then that was kind of an objection. It was sustained. Then Bonna is asked by the prosecution, do you have any doubts that Mr. Combs held you up on the balcony? And Bonna responds, I have no doubts. She is asked, did you tell Cassie that you were going to file a lawsuit? Bonna says no. Are you getting money today to testify? And why are you here today? Bonna says no, and she's here today, testifying today and even yesterday to get justice, something that she had said a couple times during her testimony. Then she's asked by the prosecution, do you remember every single detail from the balcony incident? Bonna says no. How did you feel when he held you on the balcony? I was terrified, she says. Bonna confirms that the balcony incident did happen, and she spoke about this during every government meeting. And so it seemed that from her perspective, she was really adamant that this particular incident did happen, but she just wasn't clear about what date it had actually happened.
So I think the jury might have a field day trying to make sense of that testimony. I don't think it's arguably the strongest witness for the prosecution. And then we go into when she leaves the stand, wasn't an exhibit put up that caused a little bit of a stir?
Yeah, there was. And so this was an exhibit from March 25th of 2024. It was kind of one of those stipulations between the parties about the Okalaka airport, but it was about the particular data that was extracted, this one particularly from Christina Quorum's phone. And so you see these text messages between Cassie and Christina Quorum, and Cassie says, hey, I just found out something crazy. He came into my house while my friends were here. We were sleeping. He went to Bonna, choked her, and dangled her feet off the balcony. Christina Quorum responds, what? And Cassie says, I have to stay away. And so the government really wanted to introduce this piece of evidence because I think that they might be kind of feeling some type of way in a sense that all of their witnesses, they can't recall these certain dates. But for this particular message, this was sent on September 30th of 2016. And so as far as just when this incident or alleged incident may have occurred, it might have occurred on September 30th, or it could have occurred on September 29th if you're interpreting it that way. Because again, Bonna didn't recall what particular date this happened, but she's been adamant throughout her testimony that this did happen. So I think the government really wanted to introduce this piece of evidence because the defense was implying that Bonna was lying. And so they wanted to show, okay, well, somebody told Cassie that this had happened. Cassie is talking to Christina Quorum about this. And so that message will go back to the jury when they do deliberate on this case soon, or eventually, I should say.
And it does become a question. And it does become a question whether or not Christina Quorum is going to be called as a witness, and maybe can testify about that message. Okay, now before we move into the next witness, there was something that happened that wasn't good for Sean Combs' side. My understanding was the judge was not too happy about Sean Combs' behavior, and he made it known after the jurors left the room, right?
Yeah, he did. So unfortunately, this was a moment where every time there's arguments outside the presence of the jury, right before we get to the lunch break, I'm always like, okay, should I go now? Should I leave? What is it? And so unfortunately for today, I wasn't there when the judge kind of really got into Diddy about this, but notably he was doing this. This was something that even I, sitting in the gallery, was noticing this. For example, when Bonna was testifying about whether or not she had worked on the Bad Boy reunion tour, you could see Diddy over at his seat just really nodding. Sometimes when the jury comes in, yes, we're all looking at the jury come in, taking their seats, but there are times you do see him peeking over at their side, maybe possibly seeing how they're responding. And it also could be interpreted that maybe he's looking at the prosecution or whatever attorney is doing this type of questioning. But I feel like it was only a matter of time for the judge to say
it off as Diddy just being eccentric, maybe even joking. But in light of Usher's revelations, those clips now look very different. They look disturbing, they look incriminating, and they raise questions that nobody really wants to ask out loud. Usher's words have opened the floodgates. He describes the mentorship under Diddy as less about music and more about being thrown into a world of excess, where young artists were surrounded by things that should have been kept far away from them. And when you line that up with Bieber's time under Diddy's wing, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Fans are horrified. Social media is filled with outrage, disbelief, and heartbreak. People who grew up idolizing Diddy's success now feel betrayed, disgusted by the possibility that the empire they admired was built on a foundation of manipulation and exploitation. The backlash is relentless, and it's spreading fast. Every day, more voices join the chorus, demanding answers, demanding accountability, demanding to know how deep this story really goes. And while Diddy tries to silence the noise, the truth is slipping further out of his control. Usher has opened the floodgates, and once the flood begins, there is no stopping it. The public is hungry.
Who spoke to TMZ, Bieber was actually friends with Combs' sons, and that many of his past public appearances with Combs have been, quote, performative. So in 2015, Combs presented Bieber with an American Music Award for Best Collaboration and gave him a big hug on stage. And then in 2020, Bieber did an interview with Apple Music. And in it, he expressed how he wishes he could protect other young artists like Billie Eilish from some of what he experienced in the music industry as a teenager. But he didn't really elaborate beyond that. And one of Bieber's most recent interactions with Combs was even more awkward than the prior ones, if that's possible. It reportedly took place in 2021. Nima, I want you to take a look at this with me, okay? So in the video, Bieber, with shaggy hair, under a baseball cap, he greets Diddy. He's got a big smile on his face, but something seems just a little bit off about the whole thing because Combs seems to pat Bieber's chest. There are some who have speculated that he was making sure Bieber wasn't wearing a wire, even though there's no way to actually confirm that. Nima, what do you make of that?
Yeah, awkward and weird. I'm not surprised people think that he was patting him down. Just not something that you typically see. And again, it's just part of this real pattern of kind of strange conduct between Combs and Bieber. So I understand why people are speculating that it's something more than just this innocent friendship.
You know, in 2023, Bieber had collaborated with Combs on the song Moments from Combs' last studio release. It's called The Love Album, Off the Grid, and it featured collaborations with a lot of different artists. Justin Bieber has had a lot of ups and downs over the years. We pretty much watched him grow up, and that meant that many of his mistakes and questionable decisions were fodder for the tabloids. You know, in fact, Law and Crime Sierra Gillespie actually put together a great episode on Bieber's latest struggles in the spotlight for our new channel, Scandal. I encourage everybody to go check it out. But there has been speculation that possible abuse in Bieber's past could be a source for some of his bad boy behavior and potential mental health problems in recent years. Now, Nima, that could be a stretch. Some could see it as a connection. Are you think there's something to that or not?
It could, you know, people are speculating, right? I mean, obviously I'm here in Hollywood and people will see Justin Bieber looking disheveled or losing weight. And, you know, of course, the tabloids are going to jump to conclusions, right? Is it drugs? Is it relationship problems? Is it trauma from past sex abuse? And it's really impossible to know what, if anything, he's going through, but he does appear to be acting and looking differently as of late.
But some will say, you know, if he's making this comment now.
For the truth. And the industry itself is watching nervously, because if these revelations continue, they won't just destroy Diddy, they'll expose an entire culture of silence that has protected men like him for decades. Diddy's life, his empire, his reputation, all of it is on the line. He can deny, he can rage, he can fight in court, but none of that will erase the power of Usher's words or the disturbing implications of Bieber's past. The public has seen enough to believe, and once belief takes root, it grows, it spreads, it consumes. What we are witnessing is not just the fall of a mogul, but the exposure of a legacy built on secrets, and as those secrets come to light, the man who once stood at the top of the music industry now stands on the edge of ruin. Usher's revelations have torn away the facade, and what's left behind is a darkness that can no longer be hidden. For Diddy, this is the nightmare he cannot escape, and for the world, it is the moment when the truth finally, painfully, comes into focus.